Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. This week, officials are scrutinizing a supermax prison in Wise County, Virginia, after inmate complaints and a visit by a state lawmaker.
A lot of the allegations that are stemming out of Red Onion have been general mistreatment, excessive use of force, racism, religious discrimination, prolonged use of just, isolated housing.
A laid-off federal worker warns the Trump administration's mass firings could make a big difference for coal miners.
To put it crudely, the impact will be dead workers. I've sat and listened to men younger than me talk about how they feel like they're drowning in their own lungs.
And every year, the Kentucky Mountain Laurel Festival stages a formal dance. Organizers rely on a manual that's been passed down for generations.
Those diagrams and that handwriting is of someone who took such pride in the Mountain Laurel Festival. And it's also so detailed that we can't mess it up today.
You'll hear these stories and more this week inside Appalachia. Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. In parts of Appalachia, coal mines have given way to a newer industry. Southwestern Virginia has two high-security supermax prisons: Wallens Ridge State Prison near Big Stone Gap and Red Onion, not far from the town of Pound. Prisoners at Red Onion say they live in poor conditions and are often placed in solitary confinement for long stretches of time. Reporter Charlotte Renee Woods has been covering the story. Charlotte Renee Woods, thank you so much for coming on Inside Appalachia to speak with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So your story in the Virginia Mercury is headlined, "Dangerously Understaffed. Inmates Describe Fear and Violence Behind Red Onion's Walls. Amid growing allegations of excessive force and poor conditions, a formal inquiry into the maximum security prison is on the horizon." So for listeners who aren't familiar, can you describe Red Onion State Prison, where it is, what it is?
Yeah, so among Virginia's criminal justice prison ecosystem, it is a supermax facility over in Wise County, town of Pound area, very far west part of Southwest Virginia. And so a lot of its residents are serving longer sentences or life sentences. It's got obviously tighter security and just a higher level of security being a supermax facility. But it has been a source of numerous allegations coming from inmates and family members and activists. I've been in touch with several people who live there, as well as their family members. Some people have spoken to me on record, some have not, so I can't disclose any of their information. But a lot of the allegations that are stemming out of Red Onion have been general mistreatment, excessive use of force, racism, religious discrimination, prolonged use of, Virginia doesn't call it solitary confinement, but just, isolated housing. But there have been allegations stemming from Red Onion and a few other facilities that it's being used too often, too long, for too many reasons, and it can really mess with people's mental health.
What was it that brought these complaints to light?
In 2024, a handful of inmates tampered with some electrical outlets to burn themselves. And, you could ask the inmates or ask the politicians or ask the DOC. They'll all have a different story. Was the self-harm protest? Was it just seeking a transfer for a transfer's sake? Or was it a combination of things? And so initially, I guess Virginia's Legislative Black Caucus put out a press release right around Thanksgiving last fall, saying that, 12 men had, quote, self-immolated. That conjures up a particular image. Department of Corrections Director Chad Dotson immediately came back with it was 6 people. They did harm themselves. It wasn't like fully catching their entire bodies on fire, but, they did burn themselves. That ignited, horrible pun intended given the serious nature of this, but that really stemmed some political back and forth. And I've just been documenting, what allegations I've heard, what state lawmakers have observed, because a few people have visited. There have been, the Oversight Committee, the Public Safety Committee, some state laws that were in the works during this legislative session. I'm really keeping a pulse on how many of these allegations can be proven, what might be the cause or causes, and what can the solutions be. And so I think that's going to be a pivotal thing that the new Corrections Ombudsman, Andrea Sapone, might have to play a role in when she launches her formal investigation into Red Onion specifically.
So what are you hearing in your reporting? What are inmates and their families saying?
In one particular instance, a man named Dante Ebron reached out to me, as did his brother Dominic. His family's been really concerned and stressed. There was an allegation from an altercation that happened in July of 2024 where, he alleged that an officer used excessive force on him and he was maced. And then in the process of that, he got slammed to the ground and suffered a head injury. He filed a formal complaint and he sent the documents. I had him mail them to me so I could just see what we were working with here. And it was, sort of deemed unfounded at the time, but he's hoping to see video footage to confirm and put it to bed, like what exactly went down. And it was interesting reading the incident report because, in his letter that he wrote to me, he's saying, I wasn't spitting on the officers. I was spitting in general because there was mace in my face. And then he was reacting to that. And then in the report, it's saying like he was spitting on officers. So that's why we pinned him to the ground. That's just one very specific instance, but I have been in touch with a few people that have mentioned instances of racism, religious discrimination. There's an inmate named Kong Eshiet who's spoken with me. He's spoken with a few outlets. He's alleged that certain correctional officers have mistreated him due to his, Muslim faith. Those are just a few like very specific examples, but I hope that encapsulates some of what is coming out of there. And then I think another key component that I'm looking into, just someone who covers politics and policy and regulation is, the implementation of Virginia calls restrictive or, restorative housing, because, it's a state law that was signed in 2023 by Governor Glenn Youngkin does mandate that, if someone is placed in solitary, they should have X amount of hours a day, out of their cell. Because if you're stuck in a small confined space for a very long time, that can be really damaging on your mental health. And then how are you ever going to restore yourself, if you're feeling that defeated? But there were efforts this legislative session to further reform the entire process of like, can we do mental health checks on people once they're placed in there? If someone does need to go in that type of housing for, a disciplinary reason, can we reassess some sort of in-between option instead?
So what's been the response from the state to this reporting? I'm curious what state lawmakers are doing and saying about it, as well as the agencies like the Department of Corrections you mentioned.
So obviously, shortly after the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus put out their statement and used that, they noted the inmates who had harmed themselves, and they used that a little bit as a rallying cry to like, we need to continue working on efforts as legislators to help improve, the experiences and outcomes of people who are essentially under the state's ward, like their health, welfare, well-being, because the state is responsible for them. Some of these people, they're there for life. They did a crime that puts them there for life. Some of these people will be able to get out someday. More broadly, when you look at criminal justice laws that I tend to cover, I really focus on those bills that are aimed at helping people help themselves and how can they get their life back on track. I always try to look for solutions. But more immediately in the response to Virginia Legislative Black Caucus's press release, Chad Dotson, the Virginia Department of Corrections director, had a release come out where it was a little, feathers were ruffled, I guess. He kind of referred to some lawmakers and activists as, prison abolitionists trying to, quote unquote, score cheap political points. Because, everything is politics inherently at some point. Can't always avoid it. But then you flash forward to December, and the House of Delegates Public Safety Committee held a meeting for a few hours on December 16th, I believe it was, just to specifically address Red Onion and to focus on all the allegations that were coming out of there. Dotson gave a presentation that broke down the demographics of the prison and the programming that it does have there. And then various, political advocates were able to speak up and talk about their experiences. Some people who have been incarcerated themselves. And then also the Virginia's chapter of American Civil Liberties Union talked a little bit about a case they have. It's sort of like a class action case where a few different former inmates or current inmates have been talking about allegations of mistreatment and abuse and prolonged use of restrictive housing. And so that was something that occurred in December. Around this time, they had announced the new corrections ombudsman position that was created through previous legislation. She was hired late last year. She's been staffing up her office. When I touched base with her team recently, they're mostly hired up. They needed to, add a few different people to the staff. They're planning an investigation. Obviously, they're not going to say when they're going to do it. And one of her first priorities as Virginia's correction ombudsman is to probe Red Onion. And whatever comes out of that report, I'm sure plenty of solutions will probably start to emerge.
So What happens next? You mentioned the investigation's coming. I expect lawmakers are working on some other things.
Delegate Mike Jones from here in Richmond, he actually observed when he visited Red Onion, he saw quite a few inmates there that were originally from Richmond area. And he was saying, roughly quote unquote, like I could have held a town hall with my constituents that were there. And something that Director Chad Dotson of Department of Corrections had said was he believes some of the guys that, burned themselves were just simply seeking a transfer. He thinks that some people are just fed up with the fact that they're in a Southwest Virginia prison that's so far away from their friends and family, so they don't get to see them as often, and they just want to be closer, to where they're originally from. And that could very well be true, and that could be part of things for sure. And so something that Delegate Mike Jones said that he wants to work on in, 2026 legislative session is a bill that could find some kind of middle ground where when someone's being sentenced, depending on their crime, if they need to go to a high-level facility or not, is there a way we can make sure that they're going somewhere closer to where they're from originally or where, where their crime occurred, just so people can be closer to their support system. And, to prevent another component, I think no one really has a clear answer on just yet, but it is something that has come up in my reporting and other people's reporting is staffing issues within these prisons. It's happening in the Department of Juvenile Justice. It's happening in Department of Corrections. There are certain facilities that just don't have as much staff. They need to make hires. And then the existing staff is just burnt out, tired, can't cover as much ground. And anecdotally, I've heard from a few former and currently incarcerated people that sometimes lockdowns happen, not because of a fight breaking out, but just because they're so short-staffed one day, it just makes the correctional officers' jobs easier. So I think, aside from the investigation, which could reveal more of the intricacies of what these various allegations are, I think that there's already some low-hanging fruit solutions that state agencies and state lawmakers can start really considering, and some have already started doing so.
Charlotte Renee Woods, thank you so much for coming on and speaking to us.
Thank you for having me.
Charlotte Renee Woods is a reporter for the Virginia Mercury. The Trump administration has fired tens of thousands of workers since January, including at the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. Nearly all of the workers at the NIOSH offices in Morgantown, West Virginia, lost their jobs in April. Kyle Mandler is one of the affected workers. He spoke with West Virginia Public Broadcasting's Chris Schultz about the cuts.
Can you tell me just a little bit about generally the work that NIOSH does and more specifically what you did as a pulmonary toxicologist?
Our mission is to generate data that can be used by regulatory bodies to improve worker safety, right? In Morgantown, a lot of us were studying toxic exposures in the workplace. And then, of course, we have other branches outside of Morgantown. Like there's something like 1,200 total employees, but there's only maybe 250 in Morgantown. One of those close to home is up in Pittsburgh, the mine safety office. So they did, they researched ways to protect miners from all the many hazards that they face. We also have other kind of more public-facing roles. In mining protection, we have teams that go out and do black lung screening for free for miners. We also run the 9/11 first responders health monitoring program, and there's a firefighter cancer registry that we're also responsible for. That's actually down right now. If you go to that website, it's no longer functional. It would take a long time to go through everything that NIOSH is responsible for.
What have you been working on for the past 7 or 8 years?
My group is mostly focused on aerosols and hazards that construction workers might be facing. We've been focused on engineered stone dust, which is most of your listeners are probably familiar with engineered stone. They might even have some of these products in their kitchens. They're used for like countertops. These products tend to have very high crystalline silica contents. There's currently an outbreak of silicosis in these workers, both in the United States and worldwide. And workers are dying because of their exposures. So, we were just trying to understand what about these materials makes them more dangerous than kind of, natural stones, things like that. And we were, still in the early stages, but yeah, now that work has stopped.
Tell me about for lack of a better term, work stoppage. First of all, how did you find out?
We'll back up a bit.
Sure.
because since January 20th, we have essentially been in a freeze. We haven't been able to spend money. We haven't been able to travel. We haven't been allowed to communicate with our outside partners. Our union was notified that there were going to be layoffs. And in that email, I think it said there would be something like 864, give or take, maybe 874 layoffs. 874 out of roughly 1,000 is a pretty large fraction. So I kind of figured the writing was on the wall then. But we showed up Monday and had a normal day of work relatively. And then I took my laptop home that night because I thought there might be some shenanigans going on. And about 5 a.m, we got another notification that about 200 people at NIOSH would be cut. And again, we only had maybe 250. And then my personal notification came at around 6 a.m. in an email. The main email just said that we regret to inform you that you'll be affected by this reduction in force. Please find the attached memorandum. And then it refers to a executive order from earlier this year that basically said that they were cutting large portions of the government that were inefficient.
What will be the impact of these closures?
To put it crudely, the impact will be dead workers. I've sat and listened to men younger than me talk about how they feel like they're drowning in their own lungs. Those men won't live long enough to see their children grow up. If we leave this kind of, research and regulation to private industry, it won't happen. There's a lot of talk of running the government like a business, and not to get too political about it, but businesses are in the business of business. They're not in the business necessarily of protecting workers. And if it's cheaper to expose a worker to a dangerous level of silica dust, for example, then they'll do it. We are all that stands in between the American worker and those types of injuries.
So obviously, just from what you said, you care very deeply about the work that you do. Are you willing or are you able to talk to me a little bit about how these last couple of days have been for you?
Certainly. It's still very raw. I have the pleasure of working with a lot of people who do care deeply about, the work that we do. I haven't slept well in several months. And we all, knew that something like this was possible. I don't think anyone really expected a wholesale, execution of the entire institution. I don't think we believed that, someone could be careless enough to even go after the 9/11 first responder group or the firefighter group or things like that. And we expected maybe some scientists would be forced into early retirement or, otherwise cut. But, it was quite shocking to see an institute was established by Congress 50 years ago and is congressionally mandated. Even the research component is part of that congressional mandate. We were surprised that it could be axed so carelessly. Yeah.
That was Kyle Mandler speaking with Chris Schultz. To read a longer version of the interview, visit our website, wvpublic.org. Coming up, the queen of the Kentucky Mountain Laurel Festival takes part in elaborate pageantry, including handmade crowns of flowers and pearls.
The amount of tradition and planning that goes into that, it's ridiculous. I had no idea it was that grand of a thing.
You're inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, focusing on students' futures. Classes available at concord.edu/apply.
Appalachia is home to a lot of festivals. In eastern Kentucky, the town of Pineville has the oldest festival on record in the state. It's called the Kentucky Mountain Laurel Festival, and it happens Memorial Day weekend. It's a 4-day celebration that culminates with an exquisite tradition, the Grand March, a traditional dance that's been passed down since the first festival in 1931. Folkways reporter Will Warren was born and raised in Pineville and grew up taking part in the festival. In 2023, he reported on the Grand March. We asked him on to introduce it. Will, thanks for coming on Inside Appalachia.
Mason, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So what are some of your earliest memories around the Kentucky Mountain Laurel Festival?
You know, there's so many traditions, but one that I remember vividly was my parents were volunteers for the festival, so they always worked it, but I would have to go with them as a young child, and I remember they have this reflecting pond on the festival grounds in the state park, but in the pond, there's all these salamanders, and that's what I remember as a child, catching salamanders while my mom and dad were there working. But when I was a kindergartner, I was actually chosen to carry the crown for the queen. And then in first grade, I was in what they call the miniature court. So I carried the cape train behind the queen as she was walking down to accept the award for the Kentucky Mountain Laurel Queen that year.
And for me, whenever I'm carrying around my audio recorder, it just changes my relationship with everybody around me. How did it feel to report on your home community?
I don't currently live in Pineville anymore. I haven't lived there in a bit, but anytime I go back there, it feels like home. And so I still know a lot of people there. And so the people in the story that you're going to hear, I knew all the people going into it, but asking those questions, I almost wanted to answer as I was asking it, because I knew some of the answers, but I knew that they would answer them in some unique and interesting ways. So it's always weird when you go what I consider back home and have to be on, like you said, on the other side of the microphone.
So now as an adult, you're more involved in the festival. As a director, what does that role mean to you?
Yeah, so as a director, I have a ceremonial title as an affiliate director. Even though I don't live in Pineville anymore, I can still be connected in some way. I'm still going to travel back and go to the festival, but being a director, I can be a little more involved, volunteer my time, attend meetings when I can. It just keeps me connected to something that I'm so passionate about, something that I feel like is not only important to the state of Kentucky, but also the community of Pineville. And to just be an affiliate director, to still be connected to something that I'm very proud of even to this day, that's kind of why it's important to me.
Let's listen to it.
The Grand March is actually the finale of the Kentucky Mountain Laurel Festival. Before the dance can take place, though, there's a crowning of a queen. And before that, there's an introduction of the queen candidates.
Miss Paige Smith.
As the candidates are announced, they each perform a curtsy. It's an elaborate 15-second greeting of Kentucky's governor, who comes to Pineville each year to crown the queen. I catch up with Paige Smith after she was crowned the 2023 queen of the Kentucky Mountain Laurel Festival.
I was definitely shocked. I did not think I was going to win. After being there the whole weekend and seeing how seriously they take it and how big of a tradition it is and how involved everyone gets in it, the fact that I was picked as the representative was a huge deal. I was so honored.
Paige is representing Southeast Community College. She's one of 18 candidates who came from Kentucky's colleges and universities to compete for the crown. She says she was impressed by the attention to detail at the ceremony.
The flower crown they gave me is handmade. The pearl crown I ended up getting, the lady hand makes them every year, and they're different every year. It's just the amount of tradition and planning that goes into that, it's ridiculous. I had no idea it was that grand of a thing.
Grand being the key word here. all leading up to the finale, the Grand March.
At this time, we'll start our beautiful festival tradition, 92 years, the Queen's Grand March.
The Mountain Laurel Festival Grand March is a 92-year-old tradition of couples dancing. It's a variation of a promenade. Phil Jameson is the author of Hoedowns, Reels, and Frolics, Roots and Branches of Southern Appalachian Dance.
The simplest form is promenading around the room and then up the center, and they split off. One couple goes one way, one goes the other, and they come up the center 4x4, and then 4 go one way, 4 go the other way, and come up the center 8x8.
Then they form a snake around the room to end with a human tunnel of candidates and their escorts that the Queen shuffles through. Jameson says the Grand March is a type of dance that's descended from a formal ballroom dance called the Polonaise, originating in Poland as far back as the 16th century.
All the couples would be promenading around the room, showing off their fine clothes and dignified style, and that was the way that a lot of balls opened in Europe and then in this country too, well into the 1800s, where there's going to be a dance before they start dancing, say, cotillions and quadrilles, which would be square dances or other types of dances. They would start the evening with a grand march.
The Mountain Laurel Festival Grand March takes place in a gym that's been transformed with pink and green decorations. The Queen and Queen candidates are decked out in white ball gowns. And while these women and their escorts make it look easy, the Grand March is not just something that's thrown together.
Yeah, that's the truth, because there is a order and a correct order, and it is all a fine old machine.
That's Taylor Thomas. Taylor grew up with the festival. She's now on the committee that teaches the dance to the candidates and their escorts.
It sounds kind of hard if you go through the motions, talking about it, but once you're actually standing there and doing it, it all comes together pretty seamlessly.
Part of what makes the dance work so well is that there's actually a manual that's been passed down for generations with detailed notes of the dance. That manual is treasured by the festival organizers.
Because you know that those diagrams and that handwriting is of someone who took such pride in the Mountain Laurel Festival. And it's also so detailed that we can't mess it up today.
That's Prudy Thomas. Prudy is a former Queen candidate herself and Taylor's mom. She taught the Grand March for decades and has recently turned the reins over to her daughter, who has literally been a part of the dance since before she was born. Taylor's first dance happened when the festival organizers were in a pinch.
And they needed an extra couple. Somehow they had miscounted, and at the last minute, a very pregnant Prudy Thomas has to get up and perform the Grand March.
The Grand March is deeply rooted here in Pineville, but the dance is part of a living tradition that has evolved over time. Phil Jameson says the Grand March that made its way from Poland to America inspired other forms of dance, like the cakewalk, a pre-Civil War dance form originally performed by enslaved people on plantations. It started as a mockery of the Grand March. The dance would be performed at balls held by white people.
And then the black folks would parody that and mimic it back in their own dances and putting on ridiculous, airs and high-stepping stuff, which eventually evolved into the cakewalk, which was a way of black folks kind of spoofing the white folks, the way they were dancing, promenading with their heads held high. I think it's fascinating. This dance that goes way back to, 16th century in Poland has popped up a number of places in our culture.
Places like Pineville, Kentucky, at a festival dedicated to a flower that blooms in the spring. As with a lot of small towns in Appalachia, Pineville sees the Mountain Laurel Festival as more than a festival, though. It gives the town a sense of belonging, a sense of place.
I'm telling you, that little town, it sparkles that weekend. Everybody is out mowing grass and planting flowers, and just the high school kids are painting the corners of the streets with the Mount Laurel logo. It's a time of year that this area, we put our best foot forward, and we take pride in this little town of Pineville, Kentucky.
As soon as you can walk in Bell County, you know how to do a curtsy because of the Mountain Laurel Festival. So we get people from other states, all parts of Kentucky, to come to this little Memorial Day weekend celebration that people just want to come back and be a part of it. I don't know of any other thing in the world that would compare to something like this. It's like stepping back in time, and everybody needs to come experience it at least once.
With as much pride as the town takes in the festival, there's no doubt this year's candidates will be prepared and ready to perform the Grand March. For Inside Appalachia, I'm Will Warren in Pineville, Kentucky.
That story is part of our Folkways reporting project, which covers arts and culture in our region. The Kentucky Mountain Laurel Festival returns to Pineville, May 22nd through the 25th. You can learn more at our website, wvpublic.org. West Virginia artist Antonia Capriotti creates paintings and illustrations that are full of life. Her journey as an artist began in Jefferson County's public schools, where special education classes helped her discover a lifelong passion. WVPB's Jack Walker has more.
The walls of the South Jefferson Public Library look a lot more colorful these days. That's because an exhibition from local artist Antonia Capriotti is on display. Her colored pencil works crowd the page with bright, intricate shapes. One piece titled 100 Mermaids shows dozens of faces stacked from the bottom to top edge. Others with seashells tucked behind flowing yellow hair. Works like these follow years of practice, but their originality also leaves the viewer with a feeling that Capriotti's talent is innate, that she has a unique perspective which manifests in her art. Her mother, Terry White, says that began in Jefferson County's public school system, where Capriotti was one of the first 2 students to receive a specialized curriculum for her autism.
We didn't have a place for her to go, and that's when the program was started. And when she went into kindergarten, Miss Johnny, her aide, had to hold the pencil in her hand and help her to write.
That's where she began to take up art, drawing things she learned about in the classroom.
One thing was a Paul Bunyan. What year did you start Paul Bunyan? What year was that?
2007.
7. She took a crayon. Her father had drawn this picture of Paul Bunyan that he had traced. She loves Paul Bunyan. And she took a crayon and she turned that crayon, the point on that crayon was so sharp, it was never sharpened. She took that and she dotted that Paul Bunyan, the whole thing. And someone saw it and they said, well, that's pointillism.
You'll hear Capriotti in the background of some of these clips. She has some difficulty communicating verbally, but White says art has become an outlet for her daughter to share her interests and feelings. Once she got older, Capriotti told her mom she was interested in taking art classes. Eventually, she was referred to the art program at Blue Ridge Community and Technical College in Berkeley County, where she began to study under Gary Burgle. As a professor, Burgle says removing barriers to art was an early priority.
And then they asked if I would develop just a curriculum for anybody, like a creativity, color, and design is what it became called. And I would take in any human, and in my classroom, I don't view any human as not creative. I believe we were conceived creative. Your creativity will be different than mine.
So Capriotti joined the low barrier art class, and her talent quickly became clear.
Because there's an originality, there's an authenticity. When a human being starts unfolding creatively, and they will use materials differently than a trained artist. Say, Antonia, I mean, you can't predict how she's going to use a given art material.
Plus, Capriotti's path to higher education offered encouragement to her mother, too.
She took it for credit. And the thing of it was, I never went to college. And when I took some courses, I didn't realize at the time, but the same year that she took her college classes there and got credit was the same year that I took my first class there for credit. So that was, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe we both did it at the same time. So
it was a thing you did together.
We did it, yeah, the first, I took classes.
Now, Burgle joins White and Capriotti at a home in the city of Ranson once a week for private art instruction. That's where I caught up with the three of them earlier this month. These classes have helped Capriotti curate her artwork into entire exhibitions, like the 20-plus piece show for the South Jefferson Library. Along the way, Burgle says he's seen Capriotti grow in more ways than her artistic abilities.
At first, she really did not almost speak. But by the end of our time and semesters together there, if you walked in, Jack, she'd come up and poke you in the chest just like she did here this morning. She'd say, what's your name? What's your favorite Walt Disney movie? What's your favorite musical piece in that movie, say?
Capriotti's exhibition at the South Jefferson Public Library in the community of Summit Point will be on display through the end of the month. For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Jack Walker in Ranson.
To see photographs of Antonia Capriotti's work, visit our website, wvpublic.org. In October, Cecil Roberts will step down as president of the United Mine Workers of America. Roberts says that in his 30 years at the head of the union, no achievement was more important than saving the health care and pensions of tens of thousands of retired coal miners. Roberts recently spoke with WVPB's Curtis Tate about the fight for those benefits.
I'm just wondering if you have any reflections on that, any thoughts about that effort and the folks who participated.
Oh, absolutely. The reason that you've never seen a more dedicated group of people, there has never been a more dedicated group of people than those retirees who make trip after trip to Washington, D.C., lobbying for their pensions and health care. I've had senators and House members alike tell me, both Republicans and Democrats, by the way, that they never saw a more effective group of people coming on Capitol Hill and lobbying. Those camouflage shirts that they wore time and time again to Capitol Hill, they went for about $8 a shot, and when you buy them in mass, they out-lobbied people on K Street that had a $10,000 suit on. So yes, those are they were the most dedicated people that you'll ever meet.
I wanted to ask you about your recent announcement that you're stepping down later this year. How are you feeling about that?
Well, I think the same way most people who've been doing something they love for a long time. It's somewhat of mixed emotions, but I'm dealing with reality here. Unless I plan on living to 120, now's probably the best time to consider retiring. I will miss this job every day, but I also realize that John L. Lewis left here and the union continued to move forward. Mother Jones left the union and the union continued to move forward. And this union will be fine because Brian Sampson's going to make a great president. I'm proud of the many things that we've gotten done here. People talk about this legislation we passed in 2019 for 180,000 probably in that neighborhood's people's pensions and health care. I don't think that's something that's been done by anybody else. But back in 1989, during the Pittston strike, the issue on the table on that strike was pensions and health care. They just said they weren't paying for it anymore. And we ended up winning that strike. In 2 years, we passed legislation, the first COLE Act that incorporated into the law that 107,000 people would have health care guaranteed by the government. Then, unbelievably, a few years later, we're back in the middle of that fight again. So we've been fighting here for pensions and health care since I've been an officer. Ironically, when I was born in 1946, 15 miles up Cabin Creek Road in a company house delivered by a company doctor, my dad was on strike for pensions and health care.
Wow.
The first 1946 legislation that passed, my dad was striking at that time. And the first day I walked into the district office, it's an amazing thing. Health care had been cut on July the 1st across this country by the health retirement funds. And that happened the day I walked in the door in the district. So this has been with me since the day I was born, and I hope that Brian doesn't have to contend with this anymore, because this is a crowning achievement of the United Mine Workers going all the way back to 1946. But look, I'm 78 years old. Most people know that I've got a form of leukemia that I brought back with me from Vietnam and didn't know it, and was diagnosed with it about 2 years ago. I'm in remission now, and I'm thinking, well, I'm blessed. I've got my health where it should be. I've been doing this job as president for 30 years. I was vice president for 13. I was vice president in District 17 for 5.5 years. I worked in the coal mines 5.5 years. I was in the Army for 2 years, in Vietnam for a year. I think that's a career that needs to be in the rearview mirror more than likely, and most likely. And I'll be available to do anything Brian Sampson needs me to do, and I'll lobby for if he wants me to. I'll get arrested if he wants me to. I'll pick it if he wants. I'll do whatever he needs me to do. I'm retiring. I'm not quitting.
That was UMWA President Cecil Roberts speaking with Curtis Tate. You can find an extended version of their conversation on our website, wvpublic.org. More and more coal-fired power plants are now reaching the end of their lives. They're being retired and demolished, in some cases so the land can be reused. The owners of one such site in western Pennsylvania plan to spend $10 billion to build a gas-fired power plant and data center. The Allegheny Front's Reed Frazier has more.
On a Saturday morning in March, a demolition crew took down 5 smokestacks at the Homer City generating station, as captured in this YouTube video posted by an onlooker. The plant, first commissioned in 1969, once employed hundreds of workers. In an instant, its towers were reduced to rubble. 10 days later, the plant's owner, a New York-based financial company called Knighthead Capital Management, announced its plans for the site.
You're talking about roughly 3,000 to 3,500 construction jobs initially.
Robin Gorman works with Homer City Redevelopment, the company's local affiliate that's rebuilding the site. She says it will house the country's largest natural gas power plant, which will feed the grid and data centers for artificial intelligence companies. Gorman is a former Indiana County commissioner. She said the closure of the coal plant left a hole in the community.
So the fact that the investors decided to reinvest and redevelop this site is monumental.
It's not hard to find people in the area who agree. Rick Fabian, who lives just over a mile from the plant, says he's in favor of the project.
As long as they're going to spend money, if it's going to create jobs and they're going to hire a lot of local people, hey, giddy up. I mean, we need industry here in this county. There's nothing left in Indiana County.
He remembers when he could reel off the names of manufacturing plants in the area. Now he says there are only a few. Stephanie Mantini works as head of housekeeping at the nearby Hilton. She says activity at the hotel has picked up in recent months because of the redevelopment of the coal plant.
With people staying, we have tons of business, and then that also helps my employees because then they have work to do, and it's just a great thing for Indiana right now, too.
The project is fueled by cheap natural gas from fracking in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio, and a rush to build more data centers as artificial intelligence use expands. Ari Pesco of Harvard's Electricity Law Initiative says these centers, basically warehouses filled with computers, are massive energy users.
Down in New Orleans, Meta is building a data center that may be as much as 2 gigawatts. The city of New Orleans is about 1 gigawatt.
Why do they need so much energy? For one, they do a lot of computing, and that generates lots of heat. So they use air conditioning and chilled water to cool off their equipment. Pesco says some companies are trying to power their AI data centers with clean energy, but many, like Homer City, will use natural gas.
So that obviously increases emissions, particularly because these data centers operate 24/7. So those natural gas plants there are going to be going full tilt.
The Homer City project, already at 3,200 acres, may also be looking for more land. Dave Bork is a third-generation farmer in nearby Center Township. His family's relocated farms several times over the years as the coal plant expanded. He's been approached by the company to sell his 800-acre cattle farm for the data center project. He's not going to do that, he says.
I'm not interested in selling. I've sold, over the course of my years, we've sold 3 farms to them already, and I won't sell no more. That's all there is to it.
He's in favor of the economic benefit the plant will bring to the area, at least in the short term. But he's not entirely sold yet on the project's long-term benefits for the surrounding community.
It may create a lot of jobs that we don't see, that probably not around here. Tech, I'm talking like IT tech jobs like that, not people that come from Homer City.
The company says it will create 1,000 full-time jobs, but hasn't specified where those jobs will be. For the Allegheny Front, I'm Reed Frazier.
When Hurricane Helene ripped through western North Carolina last fall, Grovemont Park in Swannanoa was one of many mutual aid sites that emerged from the wreckage. 6 months later, Swannanoa is still picking up the pieces, and the park is in full bloom. Blue Ridge Public Radio's Laura Hackett has more.
A large patch of dirt once shouldered the library and playground area at Grovemont Park. But this spring, the land is blanketed with colorful blossoms.
Over here there are double white ones and double pink ones. And there are combinations of all kind of varieties in this flower bed.
Swannanoa resident Marco Rosenbrook is the man who brought the thousands of donated tulips, peonies, daffodils, and other flowers to Grovemont Park. After weathering the storm last fall, he was looking for a way to lift his neighbors' spirits.
Flowers give hope. When you plant them, you don't know what's coming out. But when you see them in spring, you get happy. Because planting a bulb is believing in tomorrow.
The flower aficionado has worked in the tulip trade for decades. He actually grew up in Anna Palona, a small town in northern Holland known for their tulip fields.
I must admit I'm surprised by when I came here, I think 8 years ago, I was not aware that it's such a good environment to grow tulips.
He used his connection to convince the European company Dutch Grown to donate all the flowers. Then he worked with his neighbors to map out and plant all the bulbs. They framed the flower beds with rocks that were flung out of the nearby Swannanoa River when it flooded.
The soil was not perfect, so we had to first work the soil. Then we started planting. And within 2 weeks, it was perfect. It's not perfectly professional, but we're getting there, and we got done everything by ourselves, so it's kind of beautiful.
On a bench that's perched near the garden, Claire Duplace watches her 6-year-old son Quinn frolic around the park. It's her first time there since Helene, and she says seeing the flowers was a real moment for her.
It feels extra special with everything that we've been through with Helene to come to a spot and to see that level of intention and beauty and care that someone took the time to do.
Swannanoa isn't healed yet. She says living there now is like being in 2 different worlds.
every day you're seeing the devastation, but you're also seeing like everything that's been done and cared for.
Alan Dye is a community organizer in Swannanoa who worked on the mutual aid efforts in the dark days after the storm. He says there's still much work to be done.
There are a lot of people whose homes have been destroyed or damaged severely, and they're trying to get back on their feet with that.
But post-Helene, Swannanoa does have one thing going for it, he says.
There's just an amazing feeling of helping people out that we experienced every day for a month, and it forged some bonds between a group of people that are still strong. So many people of all different backgrounds came together and just completely selflessly gave themselves to try to help people around them and did an amazing job of it. And echoes of that are still all around.
Rosenbrook, the tulip gardener, agrees. He says the flowers bring more than just beauty. They represent the vision that he and his neighbors have for a brighter, more connected Swannanoa.
After the storm, we figured out that community is the basics of everything. We've got one side of the medal of the devastation, but what came out of it is people are willing to help each other, to work with each other, and to make beauty. Isn't that where humanity is meant to be?
I'm Laura Hackett.
Till next time, thanks for joining us as we journey throughout Appalachia. Our theme music is by Matt Jackford. Other music this week was provided by Jeff Ellis, Dinosaur Burps, Ron Melinex and Jerry Milnes, Frank George, John Ingram, Mary Hott, and Blue Dot Sessions. Bill Lynch is our producer. Abby Neff is our associate producer. Our executive producer is Eric Douglas. Kelly Libby is our editor. Our audio mixer is Patrick Stevens. You can find us on Instagram @InAppalachia. You can also send us an email to insideappalachia@wvpublic.org. Visit wvpublic.org/InsideAppalachia to subscribe or stream all of our stories. Or look for Inside Appalachia on your favorite podcast app. Inside Appalachia is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, offering 31 bachelor-level degrees and 6 master-level degrees for students of any age. More information at concord.edu.